Kyiv today in the middle of all this. And our friend Glenn Ignazio here with us, retired Air Force Special Operations Commander. Glenn, always good to see you. I guess kind of the basic question from your point of view, you and I have talked about this war, and you have a lot of experience there in dealing with Ukraine, is how do you negotiate and end a fair end to a war, all things considered, if you seem to be publicly favoring your adversary rather than your ally?
Yeah, definitely not good for either one to start calling this out or even making it look like Ukraine was starting this. So I think there's a lot of misspeaking, and I think there's a lot of text going back and forth. Unfortunately, Zelensky would be on the short end of the stick as far as insulting the U.S. or Trump. But as far as this negotiation, I mean, we've talked about it. It's glad that there's negotiations actually happening because it hasn't for so long, and there has to be a discussion. But yeah, this rhetoric, I don't think it's the best for anybody stepping forward.
Let me go to the maps for a moment and just talk about the practical side of it. We have a map here on the tablet of Russian-held territory in Ukraine. So I guess the practical question is, when you're drawing maps, I mean, are you just going out kind of outside of the Russian territory around here and drawing kind of a new Ukraine? In other words, did Trump give up any kind of leverage, or is it in his influence to have this leverage? Does he care? I mean, how do you see all this developing?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, those negotiations in Saudi Arabia were more than just Ukraine. You got to be realistic in that. And that beginning, again, is the dialogue. And we also have to remember Zelensky says, hey, I'm not talking to anybody other than Putin. And Putin wasn't there at those negotiations. So which one are we going to do? But back to the question about those lines, that is really going to be the key problem. We see 20% of Ukraine taken. Is that going to be split in half? Is that going to be a buffer zone? You know, all these things have to come into play.
You said
and
buffer zone one time. Is that, or did
yeah.
you? Yeah, you think that makes sense?
Well, I think there's going to have to be some kind of split. It would be nice is that, you know, Russia's going to hold. They're not going to give up, and Ukraine doesn't want to give up. So where is the middle ground? And so some kind of buffer zone that increases the security capability to say, hey, Russia has to come across as if they were ever do anything stupid, and that gives a security guarantee to Ukraine. Plausible. We'll see if that's the case. But at the same time, you know, you have Russia with incredible inflation, the sanctions 10% plus inflation right now. Those are things that Trump can influence and change for Russia to pull back. So there's a lot of things in play, and we don't know what they are yet, but Ukraine has to be part of the actual answer at the end.
Yeah, right. And the thing I keep going back to, I think it was General Clark who said it the other night, but others have said it, is that you mentioned the Russian problems in their economy and all this. They kind of need a break, you know. So that's the other thing. I know President Trump likes to say this never would happen if I was in office. And the flip side is that maybe there's a reason for that. In other words, if he gives them a sweetheart deal, they being the Russians, then Putin just reloads, and when Trump's gone in a few years, he can do this or worse again, right? Isn't that a legit concern?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I believe that one of the things that we heard in Munich, both from, you know, some of the U.S. delegations, but also, you know, the senators, was saying, hey, look, if you were to attack Ukraine in the future in any way, immediately they are part of NATO. I don't believe that that's a smart call to give NATO or give Ukraine to NATO at this point. I think that's a no-brainer for you, Putin, to say, I'm not going to do it. But if that was a trigger, there's got to be some triggers that if Russia decides to do this again in the future, like we're saying, becoming an immediate member of NATO, those are things that are definitely a deterrent. So there has to be significant deterrence. And I do believe that most of Europe has to also step up and be part of this defense versus the U.S. doing the main lead of this.
Right. Okay, Glenn, as always, thank you. Major Glenn Ignazio. Thanks for coming on. We always appreciate it.
Always.